announce things here, just so everyone has that information. And just a courtesy, and there'll be no lectures or anything. Just enjoy yourselves. The journals. Did I already mention that? I have a bad cold, so I'm taking antihistamine. So if I sound a little goofier than usual, then that's the reason. I sent out an email that for the U.S. students, just send all your journals to me as a file attachment if you can. You can always use a computer at the law school, or if it's just not possible for you to do that, you can give it to me in hard copy. It's just easier for me to keep track of it. And then for the Indian law students, they should send them as an email attachment to Professor Rao. Now, you should send what you've already done. And I actually was talking to Anna on the way over here, and I supervise an externship program. And if you had read the chapter on journals in the materials, it's, this is informal. It's just your self-reflection. So it's not like an academic paper, but it's important for these kind of experiences. And it's important to write every day, but some folks, because if you try to think back 2 or 3 days, it just doesn't, what was striking you or what was in your mind, it's just hard to put yourself back in the position. I also know that maybe at the end of the day, you're just too tired to write or don't feel like writing. But what I would suggest, and that's fine, but what I would suggest, if you want to do it at the end of the week or every 3 days, is just jot down some notes through the day that'll bring your thoughts, and then you can integrate it into the journal even if you don't write it that same day. If you can, great, but I think I have students in externships in the U.S. do it weekly, and they generally just take some notes, from different days, and it shouldn't be look like a law firm timesheet. 1201 I did this. Just if you look at the journal chapter, I think that's the best example. Just self-reflection. Yes.
A couple questions. Are we emailing entries to you daily, or?
Well, what I thought I just said, maybe not, was that you can do that, or you can wait, and if you haven't written it yet. I mean, if you write it and have email access, just send it off. But if you want, You can take notes, and then if you do the journal the next day, but I suppose you could save it up to the, what my fear about saving it up to the end is that you'll not start doing the writing until the end, and then thinking back 2 weeks, it really loses its value. So you should send what you've already done to me now, and then as you do it and complete it, send it on. And if you don't send it at the end of the day, your grade isn't gonna go down. But I'm just suggesting that you don't wait too long, and that you take some notes on what you're thinking about your experience, so you can reflect back on that. Are there any other kind of, yeah?
And then the weekends, are we doing weekends?
No, and I mean, if you go out, no, that's your free time, no, just, and in the evening, none of my business what you do. It's just on the experience, I mean, if there's something that happened on the weekend that you think, if you saw something that you think fits into the scope of the program, that's fine, but you don't have to tell me what, restaurant you went to, or to a tour, or anything like that. And hopefully in the next day, could I get just a quick show of hands, and I'm not asking you to make a commitment, or just in terms of dealing with the contract vendor, those of you who are considering going on the trip to Jaipur and Agra, okay, let me just, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
Leader in the human rights movement and trade union movement in India, Professor Babu Matthew. Professor Babu Matthew was a founding faculty of the first National Law School in India, which was started in 1988 in Bangalore, National Law School, Bangalore. And later he worked as a National Director of the ActionAid India International for about 6 years. And we are happy he has just completed his term at the ActionAid India International India, and he joined the National Law School, Delhi, as a professor. Professor Babu Matthew has been instrumental in while working with the ActionAid India International. He prepared alternative reports on human rights, and he was instrumental in several areas, mainstreaming social economic rights into the debates of the human rights in India. And he was a very inspiring teacher in the law school. He used to teach his favorite, even though his core area from the trade union labor rights and moved into the human rights, land, poverty, legal method. I think even now students still remember his inspiring discussions and making the students to think, rethink critically, and build up their own perspectives and ideas. This is Professor Babu Matthew.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Martin and Professor Krishnadev Rao. I must begin by saying that what appears in front of me is quite a fascinating scenario. I say so because it's not very often that a group from the US and from India can sit together and explore common knowledge. I assure you that's very rare in this country, and I think this is almost like a pioneering experiment in that regard. And I presume that it will multiply. And I hope the experience will be mutually enriching. I'm quite sure that while we are considered to be the two largest democracies in the world, our experiences, our ground realities are extremely different. And that's the reason why an interaction of this nature is bound to be difficult, but bound to be educative as well. And I suppose that to the extent to which we can surmount these difficulties, it's going to be more and more beneficial. I'm also happy to note that this is not just the US and India. There are also colleagues from other parts of the world who are seated in this hall. The task that has been assigned to me today is to share a few ideas in the context of child rights. The whole discussion relating to child rights has a very great advantage, and I think it's an advantage across the world. And that advantage is because we are talking about children, there's a huge potential to cut across other barriers. There's a potential to cut across cultural differences. There's a potential to cut across political and ideological differences. And in a sense, it's for that reason that dealing with child rights is a very valuable initiative. I would dare say to Professor Martin and those who have taken this initiative that perhaps they must explore this area even more. When two societies do not easily understand each other, a point of entry, a convenient point of entry is really child rights, because that's a factor which unites. Almost everybody in the world will agree that children should have the best. And in a sense, there is much more to this apparently generous statement. And the much more is contained in the fact that if you can actually realize rights for the children, then when those children become adults, it's a new world. And so if you can keep on advancing in this in a spiral manner, an upward pointing spiral manner, then it means that it will deepen the quality of that society. So one way of changing the adult world over a historical period of time, after all change doesn't come so quickly, one way of achieving that change is to work intently for children. And everybody says today's children are tomorrow's future and whatnot. At the same time, it's important to remember that while we all praise children, the whole real world is governed by adults. And I think there's a lot of tension cutting across various barriers. It's a universal tension that arises between the world of adults and the world of children. And though adults have passed through childhood, they forget what it was like to be children. And hence the tension. I dare say that the Convention on the Rights of the Child is one instrument which seeks to resolve this tension, which says that you must never forget what are the rights of children. And that appeal is not only made to children, it's made more to the adults than to the children. Of course, in the Convention on the Rights of the Child, there is the right to participation. And in that sense, the child's voice must be heard, and the child must be given certain advantages. But the ones who must hear that voice are the adults. We have found from our experience in India that even when you convince the adults that the world of the child is different, it's an uphill task. That itself is an uphill task. But even when you convince adults that the world of the children is different, then adults begin to assume that they know what is best for children in all circumstances. It's once again the adult perception that is imposed upon children. And the CRC, the Convention on the Rights of the Child, is an attempt to remind adults that they should not mechanically impose the world of adults onto children. This does not mean that adults have no responsibility. Adults have a great responsibility, and in fact what is interesting in the CRC, and some political commentators may not like it, and that is the view that the child's rights are best protected finally in the family. There are, as you know, political groupings which may not even like the notion of a family, but CRC emphasizes that the best place for the child to be protected is the family. And by implication, therefore, it's the parents who have a primary job in taking care of children. And unfortunately, not all parents may remain together all through their life. Families break down. And when that happens, then to take care of the best interests of the child is no joke. I'm hitting upon probably the most important phraseology in the Convention on the Rights of the Child, and that is, what is the best interest of the child? And when you are trying to ascertain what is the best interest of the child, please don't presume that it can always be understood from the adult's point of view. There again, how does the child understand his or her own best interest? And yet all institutions have to be mediated through the agency of adults. And so how can adults provide a forum for hearing through which the child's perspective comes forth? I think these kind of features is what makes the Convention on the Rights of the Child important. It's also useful to take note of the fact that the most ratified convention in the world, that means the convention to which there are maximum state parties as signatories, is the Convention on the Rights of the Child. Perhaps for the reasons that I mentioned. India has ratified this convention and has started to look at the convention in a serious manner. I was discussing with Professor Martin that USA has not ratified this convention, and I leave that for discussions as to why that may have been so, etc. But I'm sure in the years to come that convention will become ratified by all member states in the world. In India, even after the Convention on the Rights of the Child has been ratified, we are still in the process of trying to achieve many rights pertaining to children. And of recent vintage is an organization, an institution called the Commission for the Protection of Child Rights. That has been created by a special statute in India. It's a national commission, and that commission is also setting up various commissions at the state level, also called as Protection of Child Rights Commissions. And this is a mechanism, an additional mechanism by which things are sought to be achieved. Whenever we talk of human rights in India, it's useful to remember that we have two very valuable standards which legally stand apart but conceptually synchronize to a great extent. One is what we call as the Bill of Rights. I'm sure you've been dealing with that. Apart from the UN Declaration, which is the basic document there, there's also the International Convention dealing with the civil and political rights on the one hand, and on the other hand there's the convention which deals with the economic, social and cultural rights. And so if you take these three documents together, that's what constitutes the Bill of Rights. In India, it's almost as if the Bill of Rights has been borrowed and expanded into the Constitution of India. So if you read the Fundamental Rights chapter of the Indian Constitution, along with the chapter on the directive principles of state policy, then it is very exhaustively synchronizing with the Bill of Rights. So we have a happy situation in a sense in India. There is the international human rights regime and there is a national human rights regime, and the two converge so much that it leads to a certain disadvantage. Many people in authority often wonder why look at international human rights regime when there is such an exhaustive and self-contained Constitution of India. That's been a barrier for us. There is an element of arrogance in it, which is also supplemented by the great independence movement of India. The independence movement of India was an anti-colonial movement, and therefore there is this subterranean psyche in India that you don't like anything which is Western. And very often the conventions, any convention, any human rights convention has this initial barrier to cross. But I'm glad to say that this is being crossed more and more frequently. And one great institution which has been contributing to that crossing is the Supreme Court of India. Thanks to the fact that the Constitution of India also says that whatever the Supreme Court says will be the law of the land. And therefore it's as if they can make enactments every day. It's the equivalent of that. The judiciary is not just a judicial body. De facto it's a legislative body. in the sense that if a dispute goes before the Indian Supreme Court and it pronounces, then by constitutional authority, that word of the Supreme Court is the law of the land. And as a result, there are so many human rights which have been created and expanded, more expanded than created because of the synchronization, but expanded and sometimes even created as a result of Supreme Court judgments. So, for the study of human rights, the Indian Constitution is a very fertile terrain. And if that can be then juxtaposed with developments in the United States of America, then I think we travel many steps forward insofar as the realization of human rights is concerned. I might in this context add that the South African Constitution is of similar nature. The South African Constitution is a more recent one, and therefore they had the advantage of borrowing from many different constitutions of the world. And as a result, conceptually speaking, the South African Constitution advances many rights in similar direction. So I am only saying that it's important for us to explore human rights in a comparative jurisprudence manner, and I think that's what you're engaged in. Comparative jurisprudence is a huge addition to the development of human rights. And if you can develop human rights, that is the surest way of guaranteeing democracy. I pause for creating the necessary effect that the best way to deepen democracy is to deepen the understanding and achievement of human rights. And with this, let me say that classically, even in terms of the history of the United Nations organization, human rights fell into two broad categories: the civil and political on the one hand, economic and social and cultural on the other. And for reasons which I am not going to deal with now, civil and political were seen as something superior to economic and social and cultural. Civil and political were seen as something which must be immediately realizable, immediate realization. Whereas when it came to economic, social and cultural, it was presumed that it can wait a little. It can wait till the state has enough resources to provide for it. And ironically, Western countries, for various historical reasons, reasons connected with the history of industrialization, reasons connected with the fact that Western countries went through early capitalist development, as opposed to countries of the third world which came into capitalist development much later. And so early capitalist development had an advantage, and therefore the economic condition in Europe got transformed through the economic process rapidly, and therefore realization of civil and political rights as primary was quite all right. But that's not so in a country like India. In a country like India, the economic, social and cultural rights are grossly violated, are grossly unachieved, remain inaccomplished to a great degree. And therefore, I am saying this in order to emphasize that while the civil and political, economic, social and cultural are in the realm of general human rights jurisprudence, please note that the Convention on the Rights of the Child rests very strongly on these two legs. While the CRC deals with children, in fact it is dealing with the civil and political rights of children on the one hand, and with the economic, social and cultural rights of children on the other. And therefore what the adults have proclaimed for themselves is also what is applicable to children. So to the extent to which the adults are unable to achieve those human rights, the children are unable to enjoy those human rights. If in a society there is no civil and political right for adults, you can hardly expect it for children. And vice versa, the same is true in respect of economic, social and cultural rights, perhaps even more true. So when you are looking at USA and India, you must remember this, that USA, since it belongs to the group of countries that went through early capitalist development, had the advantage of economic transformation, and therefore the primary focus was on civil and political. Whereas India, which belongs to late capitalist country development, we have not had the advantage of economic transformation. And so economic, social and cultural rights is really the crucial thing. but you might like to look at other countries of the world. If you look at Pakistan and India, though both the countries achieved independence simultaneously, well, in Pakistan, civil and political rights is probably even more important than economic, social, cultural rights, at least insofar as the perception among the middle class is concerned. So far as economic, social and cultural rights are concerned, they are far behind India, but they don't have political freedom. In India, we have political freedom of a certain type. We have a functioning democracy of a certain type. And that is because civil and political rights, I noticed that you have put up many of the civil and political rights there. Some of them here. So these civil and political rights, they are available in India. And what the Convention on the Rights of the Child says is they must be made available to children. And it is in that context, therefore, that if you study economic, social, cultural rights on the one hand, civil, political rights on the other, in a course on human rights, just remember that you need to look at the same thing with special lenses so far as children are concerned, and then see to what extent these issues may be different. Having said that, let me then try and get into some more of the specificities. Specificities, first of all, in relation to India. I'm afraid that will be a limitation of my lecture. It's for those from the United States of America to supplement the corresponding portions. I want to mention at the very outset an illusion about India. And I'm not sure whether you will be able to overcome that illusion during the limited days that you have. And that is, India is now almost becoming a superpower. Growth is very high. The Prime Minister of India has said that we are going to achieve double-digit growth by 2011. 10% growth, more growth than what the United States of America can achieve. And indeed that's true. There's fantastic growth in India, thanks to various industries, especially the information technology related industry. From the city of Bangalore, it grew all over India and it's made a profound impact. So it is a fact that there is growth, but the beneficiaries of that growth are about 300 million people. And our population is more than 1,100 million. So it's how many? 800 million people who are outside this growth. And what is even more difficult to comprehend, about which economists may not agree, is that it would appear to many of us, higher the rate of growth, greater the exclusion. It's a very difficult, provocative statement. If there were a professor of economics here, he would stand up and oppose me tooth and nail and say, you're talking rubbish. But I assure you there are many social activists and some economists in India who would also agree with me. Higher the rate of growth, greater the exclusion. Are we opposed to growth? No. But as some of the best Indian economists have mentioned, you can have two kinds of growth. One is growth with social justice, and the other is growth through social justice. In the latter form, you make sure that as you are growing, social justice happens. In the former, you wait for growth to occur and then you hope that social justice will follow. And that's the trickle-down model. And the trickle-down model, even according to Joseph Stiglitz, who was once advisor to the President of the United States of America and to the World Bank, even he is now on record to say the trickle-down doesn't appear to be working. And that's very true in India. And why do I say this on this occasion? The overwhelming majority of children in India are children of these 800 to 900 million parents who do not have economic, social and cultural rights. So there's the illusion that there is a civil and political, and the reality that economically it's a shattered economy. Now if the child's rights is to be realized through the agency of parents partly, and if parents are in penury and this kind of a desolation, how do you expect child rights to be realized is a crucial difficulty. So we say that family is the basis. When there is utter destitution on the economic, social and cultural front, then the family breaks down. That's why you have so much of migration. Surely many of you in the United States would have seen populations that migrate into the United States of America, especially I think during the agricultural seasons, especially the colored people and the Hispanics. Now why do they come, crossing the borders? It's in order to find some employment. In India there is huge migration within the country, from one state to another, from one town to another. And when that migration takes place, father and mother are not together, let alone father, mother and children being together. And it is in that context that child labor is born. The number of child laborers in India is the highest in the world. Official estimates by the government of India is gross underestimation. They don't like to admit how many children are child laborers. But there are independent agencies. One of them has said it's about 44 million. And there's another which has done a guesstimate, not an estimate, but a guessing estimate. And that guessing estimate is based on how many children are not attending school. And they say if you are not attending school, then that child is doing some kind of work. And if you go by that kind of a projection, demographic projection, it's estimated to be 100 million children in child labor. And so that is the magnitude of the child labor issue in India. So therefore, very many of us who work on child rights are very keen that we should find a point of entry into the Convention on the Rights of the Child which makes sense. If you look just at the Convention on the Rights of the Child, more than 50 articles. One way of making sure that no human right is available is overproduction of human rights. And yet there is no single human right in the CRC which is irrelevant. All of them are relevant. But as social activists, as people who want to bring about a change, it's important to find out what is the point of entry through which you can begin to deal with human rights of a particular group of people. And that point of entry, in my opinion, and many colleagues like me who work with child rights, is the question of child labor. So for India, the entry point into the CRC, I would strongly recommend, should be child labor issue. And when you want to tackle child labor issue, there's a great activist who is now the commissioner of the National Commission on Protection of Child Rights. She is from the city of Hyderabad. She was a professor of political science. Her name is Dr. Shanta Sinha. She worked in Hyderabad converting government schools that don't function into schools that function. And she came up with a proposition. She said, I don't know to what extent that's a sociologically valid definition, but in terms of activism, it was a mighty useful definition. And the definition was, every child who is not in school is a child laborer. And I must say that transformed child rights activism in India. That was a proposition that was put forth to an organization called the MV Foundation. I have visited them several times in my life, and I have found that they are one agency which can enthuse people to start the government schools. Let me pause and tell you something absolutely fascinating about India. I don't think any other country in the world has anything similar, except perhaps China. And that is, we have 11,000 schools. We have 600,000 villages and 11,000 schools. But, and that's the tragedy, most of them don't work. They are schools with one headmaster and maybe half a teacher. I say half a teacher because at most he'll come and mark his attendance and go for some private business of his own. So most of the schools in